All right. Thanks everyone for joining today. I think we may be seeing some more people trickle in over the next few minutes, but we want to get through this before 1 p.m. Eastern time. We've got people here really from across the country. So again, thank you and welcome everyone. It's great that we have so many attendees. Probably not great that we have so many attendees, partly because we've got wildfires currently occurring really across the country, from the prairies and even in the maritime provinces where it's significantly more rare. The wildfires, they really touch all of us. So the photo that we have here is the cover slide. It was actually taken by one of our employees, Dave Shearer, a couple of years ago, not far from his home in British Columbia, as he was looking out over a lake at the fire on the other side. So these things can be really really fundamental in our lives and really cause impacts to people. And our goal here is to figure out how do we minimize that impact really as much as possible. We're going to record the session, so for those of you who come a bit late or weren't able to make it, or if you want to pass this on to your colleagues when we're done, that's we'll provide a link shortly after the presentation to everyone, so that you can review the information and pass it on to others. During the course of the presentation, we've got a few QR codes on the screen, so that'll allow you to download some relevant information. So we have a kind of a wildfire preparedness checklist that might be helpful for you. We've got access to some of the documents that we reference through the process, and some contact information. And as we go forward, I'm going to try and wrap up with 10 to 15 minutes left on the hour, so that we have some time for questions and answers. So if you could use the chat or the Q&A function and enter your questions, my colleague Emma is going to monitor those and sort of sort them and group them. And then at the end of the session, we'll try and get to as many of those questions as we can. All right. So just a little bit about me. So I'm Steve Booth. I'm the EVP for our GTA in Southwest Ontario Indoor Environmental Quality Groups. I've worked for Pinchin since 1993. Started doing hazardous materials, but moved quickly into sort of indoor environmental quality and sort of our hygiene teams, early on, sort of in the early 2000s. And I've been doing that ever since. So, we've been working a lot over the past 3 or 4 years on preparing smoke preparedness plans or smoke management programs for clients. And that's been going quite well. So the objectives for the webinar today are really to understand the changes to the fire season in Canada. So we used to have a very defined fire season, and that's really changed over the last little while. We want to try and understand the health risks associated with wildfire smoke. We want to learn how smoke enters the building and how we manage that. We want to have a look at the ASHRAE Guideline 44/2024 and national guidance from Health Canada. And we want to look at, how facilities, what those readiness plans look for, what they should include. So let's take a few minutes and we'll just look at the wildfire trends in Canada over the last few years. And so 2024 was an exceptionally severe wildfire season in Canada, with over 5.3 million hectares burned, ranking it as Canada's 6th worst fire season. So take note of that. That's a huge area, and it's the 6th worst on record. The photo on the screen is actually from the 2024 Jasper wildfire that occurred from July 22nd to April 1st, forced the evacuation of about 25,000 people and destroyed 358 structures, and incurred about $880 million in insured losses as a result of that fire. And actually, our Pinchin team is still on the ground there, working pretty much every day, collecting samples of hazardous materials, understanding impacts from the wildfire, helping insurance companies work with the insured to, either rebuild the building, demolish the building, clean the building, whatever needs to happen to get that town up and running again. So just a huge endeavor for our part on our offices out of Edmonton and Calgary who've been working on that. Wildfire trends in 2025. So this is a screenshot from firesmoke.ca, showing sort of where there were wildfires in Canada back in June of this year. And really two sort of telling things about 2025. A lot of fires reignited in BC and Alberta, so 92 in BC and 54 in Alberta by February. So these were fires that had been sort of dormant over the winter, smoldering away under the snow cover. And then as the snow and melted and the climate warmed up a bit, those fires really just started again. So it's not that they were reignited, it's that they really never stopped. They stayed under control all winter long. And that's certainly an unusual condition and something, I expect we might see more of in the future. And then so far in 2025, it's been a really explosive season. So as of August 9th, we've got over 2.5 million hectares that have burned nationwide, making 2025 the second worst wildfire season recorded. In Ontario, we've had 586,000 hectares burned, and evacuations occurred, and we've had fires happening in places like Kawartha Lakes, which is pretty uncommon. Newfoundland and Labrador is currently, we've all seen the news. They're battling major blazes and have province-wide fire bans in place. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia are also having fires and which have triggered advisories and preemptive bans to kind of reduce the risk. And of course, Canada's not alone in this. We had major California wildfires through 2025, burned approximately 18,000 structures and killed at least 30 people. So, very, very serious fire risks. And so why does this matter? And I think, so this is a photo back from CP24 in June of this year of the smoke sort of hanging over the GTA as a result of those fires in Western Canada, over the GTA, over downtown Toronto. And we've really seen the frequency and size of these fires continue to trend upward, even in the winter and early spring seasons. We've had smoke plumes that are becoming increasingly long-lasting and far traveling, crossing provincial, state, and international boundaries. And I think we've all heard in the news that there were US senators complaining about how smoke from Canada was impacting the enjoyment of people in the US over the summer months, and it was a big pain. And could we do any more about it? So this is a really substantial, I can't remember any time in my life we've heard of stories like that. So, and these fires have both health and infrastructure impact. So we did quite a bit of work in northern Manitoba after some of the worst smoke evaluations, trying to get into some hospital and healthcare facilities with other engineering firms to try and figure out how quickly people could get back in the hospital and get those towns opened and those evacuations closed. And they, continue to drive forward. So the costs also related to wildfire smoke and the secondary impacts are actually much greater than those, the cost of the buildings burned or the infrastructure that's damaged. So there's not a lot of Canadian data, but in the US data, a study done by Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation looked at wildfire impacts from 2017 to 2021 and the indirect impacts. So those that are related to health and wildfire smoke, they estimated $106 billion in impact versus the direct impact of $45.9 billion. So, the local communities need to deal with those infrastructure costs, but that health impact affects a much broader area of Canada and the United States. So there's essentially a 30-30 rule, 30-30-30 rule that talks about, when fires really become a risk, and that's what we're seeing more frequently. So temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius, wind speeds above 30 kilometers an hour, and low relative humidity below 30%. You get those three things combined for an extensive period, and fires become much more likely and much harder to control. How do they start? Lightning and storms cause, you get the right, those 30-30-30 conditions in place. You get a lightning strike, that lightning strike can get out of control quite quickly. But a lot of fires are started because of human interaction in those forest areas. So discarded cigarette butts, campfires, someone burning brush to clear land, grass fires start. Those are a lot of the causes that we're seeing in addition to natural causes. So that brings us to this kind of slightly different fire triangle. You need fuel to have a fire going, and our forests provide that fuel in abundance. We need oxygen, and there's lots of oxygen on Earth. 30% of the environment of our atmosphere is oxygen, so there's lots of that around. And then we've got people doing stupid things that often are unfortunately the cause of the fire. And we've seen, in Eastern Canada, there's a report on CBC this morning about people sort of intentionally ignoring the fire ban because it was infringing on their personal freedoms to have a fire, or disregarding the orders not to travel by ATV into the bush, again, for sort of those same kinds of reasons. And there was also a report about people on social media like complaining that these restrictions were in place when they're for the public good. And so, that brings us to, those are the trends. Why are those trends happening? Well, climate change is a really significant component of that. So Canada's climate is warming regularly. We're seeing increased precipitation in some parts of Canada, but that means there's less rain in other parts of Canada. And that less rain brings those drier seasons, that longer, hotter weather, that more temperature extremes that cause more and more fires to happen. And when we look at this, Canada's climate has warmed roughly 1.7 degrees since 1948 on average, but 2.3 degrees Celsius in some areas. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a significant amount when it comes to managing these fire risks. So now we'll spend a few minutes just to talk about the health effects of wildfire smoke, and why this matters, and how this impacts us if we're not in the direct sort of burn area. So there's a plume of wildfire smoke that's generated really in every fire, and it is really a complex mixture of chemicals. So commonly we think of it as wildfire smoke, but what is that made of? And there's a real complex mixture of chemicals, from volatile organic compounds to large and small particulate material, so PM10 and PM2.5. There are semi-volatile organic compounds, there are metals, there are chlorinated compounds created. There's all kinds of things that are generated. PAHs can be generated and are a significant risk related to wildfire smoke. So all of these things happen. The heat from the fire pushes these plumes of gases well up into the atmosphere, and then the natural weather systems can move those smoke plumes thousands of kilometers from the source. So you saw those firesmoke.ca images. You can see that smoke from those central Canada wildfires is moving all the way out to Eastern Canada and into the US. And if I look back at those similar images from 2023 and 2024, there were plumes of smoke from Canadian wildfires that were moving well into the Atlantic Ocean and actually starting to impact parts of Europe. So that's how far these wildfire plumes can migrate. The exact composition of the smoke, it varies considerably, so that it's not a homogeneous mixture, and its composition is affected by factors such as the fuel type, the burn temperature, and those sorts of things. So, some examples are shown on this screen here. So you've got kind of a peaty wildfire, and it's smoldering. That delivers a very different kind of smoke. So that's, maybe that overwintering fire, it gets into the peat bog. Those coals essentially stay, and then it's a smoldering because there's not a lot of oxygen there. And then we have fires that are more open forest, lots of oxygen, create very different issues. And they make the studying of how the smoke and how it interacts with people much more difficult, because you're not looking at just wildfire smoke isn't one thing. It acts on everyone in one way. It's a bunch of different things, and it acts on different people in different ways. So there are, some acute effects to wildfire smoke that affect really the vast majority of the population when we're exposed. Those commonly include eye irritation, runny nose, sore throat, cough, headache. Those are really common in healthy individuals, and the CDC created a study that supports this back in 2014. Um, just a couple of sort of personal anecdotes around health effects. So we have an asbestos laboratory, a microbiology laboratory in Mississauga. The labs need to run on 100% outdoor air. So last year there were 2 or 3 times over the course of the summer where, because it's bringing in 100% fresh air, we had to resort to air scrubbers and other things in the lab because the irritant effects on the occupants in the lab was really quite significant. And then I have a cottage that's sort of south of North Bay and west of uh, the French River, and that the French River had a huge fire on the shore of Georgian Bay 2 or 3 years ago now. And for a period of time while we were up, it was nearly impossible to go outside. That we in that case we were close enough to the fire that the odor was overpowering, immediately catches in the back of your throat, difficult to breathe, and really staying inside is the only course of action. In those kind of scenarios, which thankfully are relatively few and far between. Um, Nearly every study around wildfire smoke impact have shown exacerbation of asthma during high smoke periods. And the same is true for COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Wildfire smoke irritates the lungs and causes immune responses, which exacerbates those two conditions in particular. And then the young and the elderly also have higher risk of infection and complications with wildfire smoke because it's aggravating the tissue in the lungs. And there have been some indication that pregnant women are under those same, their immune system's a little more stressed. So, the wildfire smoke in the lung causes irritation, and then there can be issues as a result. So communities have generally seen like increased use of medical visits, so more people going to ER for those kind of systems with those kind of symptoms. A real increase in the use of prescription of asthma medication during those periods of intense wildfire smoke. So that's like an immediately notable event. Yeah, so for those of us that are managing buildings, that might have vulnerable populations, these smoke management plans become particularly important because the health effects, the impacts for those individuals, particularly in those high smoke days, can be much worse. So long-term care facilities, healthcare settings, school facilities, hospital healthcare, those kinds of things are particularly at risk. And then, something that we don't think about very often when we think about the impacts around wildfire smoke or wildfire smoke and mental health. So there was there have been a number of studies. One Harvard T. Chan study back from recently, 2025, that found there were significant increases in emergency department visits for mental health, depression, anxiety, and mood disorders with wildfire-specific PM 2.5 exposure in California. And then PM10 exposure also looked at the increases in depression and anxiety and mood disorders for up to 7 days after those kind of high-level exposures to those particulate materials. And those impacts are really seen most in women, children, young adults, and socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. So again, we have to both think about the general population and then specific subgroups within the population who may be more significantly impacted. So let's take a look now and we'll think about smoke and occupied buildings and how that smoke can enter the buildings and what the major pathways are, because we have to understand those pathways in order to prevent the smoke coming in and impacting the occupants. And to be fair, I mean, I think many of these will be pretty obvious to many of us on the call, but I think they're still worth noting. So, the most common and most direct pathway is opening doors and operable windows. So thankfully, most commercial office properties don't have operable windows, so that's not a concern. But we do a lot of work in the public sector, and we do a lot of work in courthouses in particular, and the judiciary really like to have an operable window in their office. So, in those types of buildings, we still see operable windows, and an operable window or a door propped open, or a door without appropriate weather stripping, or a door without a vestibule. Those are immediate routes for unfiltered outdoor air to enter the building, which, for most of our life isn't an issue. But during these periods of wildfire smoke, can be particularly problematic. So it's something we need to understand and pay attention to as a major pathway for smoke entering into buildings. The second most common, rooftop air handling units. I mean, all air handling units will bring in outdoor air. Larger commercial building air handling units often have a two-stage, a pre-filter and a relatively high efficiency MERV 13, or maybe even better bag filter behind that. So, those systems are, equipped to handle wildfire smoke better than rooftop units that may be seeing MERV 8 or MERV 10 filters commonly installed, and may not operate as well with a MERV 13 filter in place, or certainly greater than MERV 13. So the air gets partially filtered when it comes in through whatever the air handling unit system is, but it's not entirely filtered. So some smoke, and as the particulate concentrations increase outdoors, more material is going to make it past the filter. So we have to understand how those ventilation systems contribute to smoke coming into buildings. This is probably more residential than commercial, but there are unfiltered makeup air that sometimes comes in residential settings into furnaces and those kind of things, maybe through an air-to-air heat exchanger. That air pulled in directly out from outdoors is makeup air, combustion air, or whatever. Certainly can be a source for particulate matter and wildfire smoke entering the building. So the last major sort of route is poorly sealed envelopes and openings in the building. So, weather stripping on the exterior doors, failed caulking around windows, failed caulking around expansion joints, flashing issues, all those things that, might potentially lead to water damage issues as well, can allow smoke to infiltrate into the building. Like, for most commercial properties, we're trying to maintain a slight positive pressure there, which certainly helps keep wildfire smoke out. But in taller commercial properties, stack effect is really common. So, the lower portions of the building will be under negative pressure to the outdoors. The positive portions of the building will be under positive pressure to outdoors. So air comes in the building on the bottoms, drawn up through the middle, and then vents out the top of the building is very common. So, even in those buildings, we see these pressure effects and these small penetrations being a source for smoke to enter the building. So we'll talk now a little bit about, we understand kind of the health effects, we understand the trends. Let's look at how do we forecast when we're going to have to do something? How do we understand when to take action and when not to take action, when we don't have to take action? And there are a couple of really good tools. So Environment Canada has done a really good job in two areas. And the first is their Air Quality Health Index. So the Air Quality Health Index looks at ozone, PM 2.5, and NO2 as indicator pollutants to determine general air quality. All of those things are impacted by wildfire smoke. And the general recommendation was, when the Air Quality Health Index is above 7, you're better to start reducing outdoor activities if you have no pre-existing conditions. And then, it's the Air Quality Health Index is available both online. That link that I have on the screen will take you there, and it really covers, there's an air quality for every major community in Canada there. So you could look at North Bay or Toronto or Kelowna. Each one of those sites will be available. And two things are given. There's an immediate air quality health index. So what is it right now? And there's a forecast. So what's it going to look like? What do we think it's going to look like tomorrow? What do we think it's going to look up to the day after tomorrow and the day after that? So, that helps you plan. It's broken into really four categories. So a low risk, a medium, a high risk, and then a very high risk. So when you get 10 plus, you move into that very high risk category. There's also an app you can get on your phone, the WeatherCan app. Up until recently, it was a different app. Can't remember the name now, but the WeatherCan app on your iPhone and Android devices has replaced the previous device, giving you a variety of weather information and all of these air quality health indexes. And it can alert. You can set up alerts for your phone, at certain trigger points. The other tool that's available for us is firesmoke.ca. So firesmoke.ca looks at pinpoints where the fires are occurring nationally across the country. It provides a visual depiction of where the smoke is moving from those fires based on current weather patterns. It really looks at PM 2.5 concentrations, and it'll roll a forecast of up to 48 hours in advance. So those two tools together can be really helpful in understanding. I don't have to do anything today, but maybe I have to start prepping to change out some filters or to reduce ventilation or to do something that might be something I need to do on Monday when we're back in the office, because it looks like smoke might start building over the weekend and linger into the early stages of the week. And then, finally, we can do particulate monitoring. So both particulate monitoring at the site, you can bring consultants in to do particulate monitoring. More and more clients are moving to continuous monitoring of certain indoor air quality parameters. So Pinchin have an active IAQ system that operates via LoRaWAN and relatively low cost, a few $100s a piece. Sensors for PM 2.5 specifically. That's that NetFox sensor you can see there. And you can deploy those throughout a building. The Pinchin core system can then provide alerts, when PM 2.5 concentrations are moving over trigger levels so that you can take action. They can be installed outdoors so you understand the outdoor conditions, not just generally in your community, but specifically around your building. So those kind of continuous monitoring systems, whether they're ours or someone else's, can certainly be really helpful. And the graph you see at the bottom is a graph, I think, from our BC offices back in the 2023 fire season that show, how explosively those PM 2.5 numbers go up in the offices and where they sit most of the year when there's not a fire. And then there are a variety of handheld devices that you can purchase to do spot measurements. A really critical aspect of these handheld devices is all of the standards about when to take action are based on a mass to volume concentration. So micrograms of particulate material per cubic meter or cubic foot of air, mostly cubic meter of air. A lot of the really inexpensive particle counters that you can buy online measure counts per cubic meter. So there are, in this size fraction, PM 2.5, there are 100 pieces of dust in each cubic meter of air. The problem is there's no easy way to bring a comparison from that to the standards. So it's just really important when you're sourcing these materials to get something that gives you that mass calculation and gives it to you in the PM 2.5 split particularly. PM 2.5 and PM 10 are great, but you really want to see PM 2.5 as a key element for if you want to be able to use it to evaluate these wildfire situations. So then how do we use those PM 2.5 numbers? And I'll be clear, there's not a 100% direct correlation between the PM 2.5 number and the air quality health index, because that air quality health index is PM 2.5, NO2, and well, I can't even remember the other one off the top of my head now. Anyway, it slipped my mind. Anyway, it's sort of a blended index, and all we're measuring when we're measuring particulate is PM 2.5. So that just one piece of that trifecta that inform the air quality health index. But we can draw some general relationships. So that 1 to 3 range, particulate number ranges between 0 to 30 micrograms per cubic meter, moderate 4 to 6, 31 to 60, high 7 to 10, 61 to 100, very high, greater than 10, greater than 100. So when you're starting to see those numbers, particularly inside the building, those health risks are increasing at the time. So, in that 0 to 30 range, normal operation, as usual, everything, just routine HVAC and IAQ checks. You start to get in this moderate range. Well, you start with some initial response. Reducing the amount of outdoor air, making sure that those openings are sealed, that kind of stuff. Starting to get into high, then we get to our full mitigation numbers, more enhanced filtration, occupant advisories potential, and then in the very high range, you may be looking at temporary closures, clean air spaces within the building for people to take refuge in, really the maximum level of restriction. And we'll get a little more into that as we move into the next section of slides, which is really our, how do we prepare for these wildfires going forward, right? So this QR code that's on the screen now, if you take a second and scan that, should link you directly to our wildfire smoke checklist, which covers off a lot of the things that we're going to talk about over the next 10, 15 minutes as we sort of move to wrap up our presentation and get to the question section. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them into the questions and answer section, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end of the session. So I'll give everyone just couple more seconds just to scan that if you're interested. And then I'll move on, and maybe I'll bring it up at the end if everyone isn't able to get to it right now. But we'll move on. So the recommendations we're going to talk about in the next few minutes on how to sort of prepare really come from 2 or 3 guidance documents. I'd originally cited a PSPC guidance document, but I've realized that that's actually not readily available for everyone online, so it's not particularly helpful as a reference. So I kind of rejigged a little bit, and we've got from 2024 the ASHRAE guideline protecting building occupants from smoke during wildfire and prescribed burn events. So there's no QR code for that. You have to go to ASHRAE's website and pay for it. It's a copyrighted document, so unfortunately, we can't share a copy with you. The second document that supports it really is Health Canada's document guidance for cleaner air spaces during wildfire smoke events. And that QR code on screen there should take you directly to the Health Canada site where you can access the PDF version of that document for download and use when you're putting your plans together. The ASHRAE guideline really focuses on how to design, operate, and maintain buildings to keep wildfire smoke out and protect occupants. So it talks about using the building envelope and the HVAC system to limit infiltration, to upgrade filtration to MERV 13 and seal any bypasses, to have a smoke readiness plan in place with clear roles, triggers for smoke mode and recovery steps, and to monitor outdoor and indoor PM 2.5 and adjust ventilation and recirculation during poor conditions. So that's, the ASHRAE guideline in a nutshell. The Health Canada, very similar, it aims at creating sort of creating and operating public and private buildings as safe havens during smoke events. That sort of key points for them are maintaining lower PM 2.5 concentrations than outdoors, keeping CO concentrations below 10, keeping CO2 concentrations below 1,000, and maintaining relative humidity within a comfort range. Preparing in advance. They talk a lot about stocking up on filters, training staff, planning for occupancy, having a power backup if power goes out, limiting entry and exit activities that generate indoor air pollutants during wildfire events, and they talk a lot about portable HEPA air cleaners and how those can be used to supplement the central systems of the building. The bottom line really for everyone here is that they all talk about sealing and filtering the building, planning ahead, understanding your triggers for action, and monitoring indoor air quality so that your building maintains a refuge when outdoor air is unsafe or at least uncomfortable. So, we'll start talking about development of the management plan. And the most important thing I think we can all do is start to prepare early. And I realize having this session in August is not allowing anyone to prepare early, but hopefully you're prepared early for next year. And, the specific goals of the plan really are to provide a comfortable and safe environment for people inside the buildings, to optimize that occupant satisfaction during those severe smoke events. It might not be perfect, but it can be, better than really bad. Comply with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, preserve our capital investment, and really ensure effective communication during these things. So we'll talk about, each one of these plan content pieces in a little more detail as we get through the rest of the slides. So, the roles and responsibilities piece is something that's often overlooked or under considered when people are putting together these kind of management programs. And it's really essential that everyone that's part of the building management team understand their roles so that, we can have a coordinated and timely response when these smoke events occurred. So, from a property/facility manager, their responsibility might be to oversee the plan information and liaise with the other internal teams in the building and the tenants. The building operations team, their role needs to be clearly to execute those HVAC adjustments, install the filters, deploy the personal air cleaners, those kinds of things. The corporate health and safety teams need to provide guidance around the risk and the triggers and the thresholds for those air quality health index and the PM 2.5 numbers. We might be bringing in security and front of house staff to manage public entry and exit points and as communication points to the tenants about what's going on in the buildings. External contractors are important to sort of engage early. So, it's entirely likely that everyone's not going to have HEPA air scrubbers or other kinds of personal air cleaners 24/7 in the building ready for deployment. So having relationships with contractors who can bring those in when they're needed, and you're not negotiating that at the time, that's been negotiated well in advance, right? If you want to have people come in and do indoor air quality testing, have those relationships in place in advance so that you're not scrambling as the smoke event is arriving on you to figure out how you're going to act. And so hope those roles should be clearly defined in the plan. It's really important to do a building envelope review. So to conduct a walkway, a walkthrough, identify those potential infiltration pathways that we talked about earlier. Look at the window and door seals, look at utility penetrations, roof hatches, elevators, exhaust intakes, vestibules and lobbies. All those kinds of things are those sites. So, is the weather stripping on all the doors intact? Is it intact on that roof hatch? Those kind of things are things that potentially get missed. And then take the time to seal those before the problems become an issue during a smoke event. Look at your HVAC systems compatibility. So can the systems you have support MERV 13 or higher filters? Can you set those systems on a recirculation mode? Is that configurable via your BMS, or do you have to send someone up to the unit to do that manually? Are the economizers controllable? The last thing you want is an economizer system that's designed to bring in free cooling in the spring and brings in lots of outdoor air, opening up automatically to bring in that outdoor air and help control the temperature during an early season smoke event, right? We want to make sure that doesn't happen and those systems are shut off during those periods. And then, just confirm the maintenance status. So, Additional loading on the filters puts additional stress on the air handling units. So the filters, the belts, all that kind of stuff need to be properly maintained to be ready to handle these smoke seasons. It's important in advance to get supplies and equipment in place. Stockpile those MERV 13 or MERV 13 to 16 filters that are suitable for your units. Make sure you have the filter gaskets, the filter clips, sealing foam, all that kind of stuff in place. You'll want to have the portable HEPA air cleaners in place. Maybe spare filters for those if they're filters that you're maintaining and not that you're bringing in through a contractor. And you might want to look at stocking N95 masks for essential personnel that have to be in the building or working outside of the building during those really high smoke events where you can't fully control and keep those levels down to that below 30, below 35 micrograms per cubic meter range. So the ASHRAE document suggests a smoke mode operation. So that is a moderate version that kicks in at air quality health index 4 to 6. You're starting to switch to recirculation mode on your HVAC system. You're minimizing the outdoor air to code allowed minimums. You're disabling those economizers on those direct control ventilation systems to avoid bringing in more outdoor air, and you're ensuring those MERV 13 plus filters are installed and functioning. You're closing windows, rooftop access, vestibule doors, reducing entry, limit or postponing non-essential outdoor maintenance. So, maybe this isn't the time to be doing the roofing work, not time to, be doing the landscaping or a window washing project when we're starting to get into this moderate smoke levels. We also want to start measuring PM 2.5 and CO2 concentrations fairly regularly. PM 2.5 is that indicator of wildfire smoke and how it's impacting the indoors, and CO2 because as we slow down the ventilation, that's what we're using to control those occupant effluent, the people source contaminants. So body odor, breath, all that kind of stuff. That's what CO2 is trying to look at. And then we want to be looking at those air quality health index levels regularly. And that fire and smoke site, like, what's it going to be like tomorrow? Can I let this let up tomorrow? Or do I have to move to the next phase tomorrow? What's coming up? And at this point in time, thinking about occupant communication. So, emails or portal notifications that smoke mitigation measures are in effect. And, we might want to highlight that these sensitive groups may be more at risk. And we can get all that information really from Health Canada's AQHI index, because that will be listed there. So, and then, we start to get into the 7 to 10 range. We want to escalate those mitigation procedures. Really, as much as possible, we want all our ventilation and recirculation mode only. We might consider, in double stage filters where we have a pre-filter and a higher efficiency bag filter, we might want to up the filtration efficiency on the pre-filter in particular. We might want to start looking at carbon filtration impregnated into our filters to try to control the VOCs and odor that can start to become an issue when we get to these higher levels of smoke. This is where we want to start thinking about deploying the portable air cleaners. So HEPA air scrubbers. We might want to set up, in the building an internal space like a lecture hall or a large meeting room with a few air scrubbers as sort of a safe air refuge for people, a little bit like we do with emergency cooling centers during heat waves and that sort of thing. We want to lock out those exterior dampers, suspend high infiltration activities. So, if you're doing loading, this maybe isn't the day to take a huge delivery of products into the loading dock, where the loading dock door stays open for an hour as equipment moves in and out or something, or construction deliveries occur. Those kind of things, you look at putting those on hold. And then if we have unpressurized stairwells, you might want to look at closing those or trying to maintain them under slight positive pressure. Again, we're looking at potentially providing the N95s to those frontline personnel where it's warranted. and notifying tenants about the elevated risk level and the clean air space availability. And at this point in time, you're also doing some contingency planning on what do we do if it gets worse? Do we have to temporarily relocate or a temporary closure? So we should be starting to consider what happens there, and again, monitoring those air quality health index levels. From a communications protocol, trigger-based messaging works best. So what are we going to tell people when we're in that air quality health index 4 to 6? A moderate alert, we're taking some HVAC actions. It's a pretty basic notification. Air quality health index 7 to 10. Maybe that's a tenant memo. Maybe it indicates about those portable air cleaner deployments and where those spaces are. And then, when we start to get really high, maybe that's when we're starting, like, do we have to do more than that? Is there a relocation or something, or a temporary shutdown that might become necessary? And how do we communicate that? And ideally, you've thought about how you're going to communicate all those things long before you ever have to do it. It's much harder to figure those things out in the panic of the moment than it is to plan it out a year in advance and have a script ready if that script needs to be delivered. Emails, tenant portals, signage in your elevators, and those kind of things. Those can all be good ways to get those communications out. But each building's going to be different, and each property manager is going to handle it in a different way. And just align your communication with a Public Health and Environment Canada alerts, and make sure that whoever you assign responsibility to is like coordinating all of that, right? You don't want one office tower in the city giving one set of advice and another office giving something else. So there needs to be some central coordination of when these messages are coming out and what they're going to say, and it needs to be done in a coordinated fashion. So then, hopefully we end up in a situation where those smoke levels come right back down again, or back in the normal range, and we can return to normal building operations. So, part of the plan needs to be, how do we do that? What are the steps we take as part of that return to normal? And, we want to resume outdoor air again once the PM 2.5 drops below those safe thresholds, like that roughly 35 micrograms per cubic meter, and the air quality health index is back to low. We might want to look at performing a building flush out at that point in time. So recognize we've had some infiltration of wildfire smoke particulate. There may be some odor still, so flushing the building, having a look and inspecting filters after a significant smoke event so they can hold wildfire smoke and odor for a long period of time. So changing out those filters. And, in some cases where it's been particularly severe, there may be some cleaning that's required. Certainly for some of these northern Manitoba healthcare sites that we went to look at, the reoccupation of those buildings was really a big part of that was a very thorough cleaning before reoccupancy. And then, you need to look at the plan. So, hey, we put a plan together a year ago. We just had this event. These parts of the plan went really, really well. It was great. These parts of the plan were a disaster. Holy mackerel, were people really upset when we sent that email out? We need to look at a different way to communicate that next time, right? So that that review of what worked and what didn't work, and then restocking supplies. So, you've used up some N95 masks, you've used up filters, you've used up that. So make sure you're restaffed. And then once everything again, an additional round of training and for staff to sort of implement the changes that you've made in the plan from the prior year. And that sort of runs us a little longer than I thought I was going to go, but we're still got a few minutes for questions and answers. So maybe Emma, you could help me figure out what we should be answering.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a few questions in the chat, so I'll start with those ones. So our first question is on the mental health piece. What did the study show happened to mental health after the 7 days? Is there known lasting impact?
Yeah, so that particular study just really just talked about that increase in medical visits occurred and that they were related to those situations, and that that diminished. But presumably there could be if those individuals who came in for that immediate visit, some of those effects presumably would linger longer than the 7 days. But what the study showed was that the visits, the number of events that were happening that were acute enough that someone wanted to go and seek advice for it, those began to come back down to the normal background levels that we see.
Okay. And our next question is AQHI and PM 2.5. Those PM 2.5 numbers are for 8-hour average or 24-hour average?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think, when we're looking at monitoring, I think, and you're looking at a handheld particle counter to understand that they are, so what we're talking about when we're managing in the building is really an instantaneous level. So if you're consistently seeing 35 above on a regular basis, then that would sort of trigger some of those action levels. It's a good question on the AQHI. It may look at the rolling 24-hour average. So you could actually be higher in the moment than that. I'll have to get back to you exactly how they implement that into the AQHI index, whether it's a 24-hour average or they're doing a more of an instantaneous measurement.
Okay. And then we also have a few questions coming through about the recording. And I can just let people know that the recording will be available on our website sometime next week as well, under the news section on our website. And we also do post it to our social media platforms like LinkedIn. So keep an eye out there for this recording as well. And then our next question in the chat is, are there any workplace regulatory limits now in Canada in regard to air quality due to forest fire smoke?
So I think the short answer is, from a regulatory point of view, the answer is no. So there's guidance documents from Health Canada, and there's ASHRAE, and there are OELs, but there's no OEL that specifically applies to wildfire smoke. I mean, in the same way that there's no OEL that applies directly to fungal contamination in a building and airborne spore concentrations in a building. But that doesn't mean, like, the Section 25 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, I think, is broad enough that, the Ministry of Labor in Ontario were involved with a worker issue around, high levels of wildfire smoke and high PM 2.5 levels and a lot of irritation. Like, they would act on that using that due diligence clause, I think, in the same way that they would act on microbial contamination in a building. To be fair, I don't think I've seen an example of that happen anywhere like we have with fungal contamination. But so no, there's no direct regulation, and there are, what I've highlighted to you today are guidance documents and guidelines. But I think there could be some enforcement under that Section 25 due diligence clause.
Okay. And then Canada's AQHI is not available for remote locations such as mine sites in remote northern locations. Other than using firesmoke.ca, are there any other resources or websites that can provide similar AQI information?
Yeah, there are a couple of provincial ones that might provide more info. I know our BC office did a very similar presentation to this earlier in the spring, and they had some BC specific info, and I think there's some Alberta specific info as well. So the answer is maybe. So let me look into it a bit, and I'll try and get back to you.
Okay, and next question, any experience dealing with fertility clinics? IAQ is critical on normal days, let alone wildfire smoke. We typically use a 4-stage AHU for lab and procedure room clean air. Curious if this has come up as a topic yet.
Not specifically in context of wildfire smoke, but we have been asked on a couple of occasions to do some ambient air quality monitoring at sites where people were planning on putting it like developing a fertility clinic, and you like the air quality numbers are like remarkably stringent. So I mean, I think it's a challenge to reach the numbers you want inside fertility clinics at the best of times. It would be even more challenging during a significant wildfire event. So it hasn't come up specifically with us, but I can clearly see how it would be a big significant issue.
Okay, and I'm jumping into the question and answer box now. And we just have a question about when you discuss supplies, you mentioned stockpiling N95s for use when PM 2.5 is above 30 UG per M3. Did I hear that correctly? Also, is this mentioned in a standard?
Yeah, I mean, so to be clear, I don't think none of the standards say, hey, if PM 2.5 gets to 30 or above, which happens fairly regularly, that you need to be giving everyone everyone an N95. So the standards recommend having N95s available, and then using them as appropriate. So and I'm not like, I certainly don't think that at 30, every occupant of a building should be wandering around in an N95. Like that would be very, very extreme and frankly terrifying for a lot of people. So, but you may have a couple of maintenance guys who need to go work outside on the roof, and it's not 30 micrograms, but it's 65 micrograms, and they're going to go do some work on the HVAC, and one of them has relatively mild asthma. To be able to deploy an N95 in those specific circumstances, would be very helpful. Maybe when you get up into the very, very high risk, hey, for tenants, we have N95, if you're experiencing discomfort and there are N95s available, that might be something someone chooses to do, but there's no mandatory requirement to do that, certainly. Again, these are guidance documents. They're not intended to be, a thou shalt regulation. They're sort of a best practice recommendation.
Okay. And then what is the percentage proportion of fires started by lightning versus those by humans?
It's an excellent question. And I'll be sure to ask ChatGPT it as soon as we're done this call. Honestly, I don't know off the top of my head. I know it's a combination of causes, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Okay. Good question, though.
And if in the return to normal phase, if the building did have a lot of smoke enter the building and post-fire the IAQ is still poor as a result, is there any strategy within existing HVAC systems that can be done even temporarily to help bring down the IAQ?
Yeah, so in that, there are certainly buildings where in that very high level in particular, that you might have ongoing issues. Even after the filters can become impregnated with lots of wildfire particulate. That particulate is odorous, and most of your filters aren't going to affect the odor at all. So you might be looking at swapping those out, as needed. We talked a little bit about flushing the building. So now you've got nice clean air outside. Start bringing that in like 100% ventilation for a period, so that you're doing a building flush and getting it. And then, I think you have to have pretty significant, probably 10 plus to have significant particulate accumulation in the building, but you never know. So, a thorough cleaning of the building can also happen. So wiping down of horizontal surfaces to, if any smoke particulate entered the building, that stuff's getting cleaned up. So those things will definitely help. And then operating those portable air cleaners as well, for a while after the fact, that can certainly help as well to mitigate the effects afterwards.
Okay. And then do we have time for one more question, Steve?
Sure, I figure we can fit one. I've got nothing else to do.
Okay, perfect. So the last question is there guidance on accuracy required for PM 2.5 sensors that are installed both indoors and outdoors?
Yeah, it's a good. I'm not sure that there's specific recommendations around that. Like most of the direct reading instruments, like the higher end, like I showed the TSI dust track, and we use a Particles Plus unit. So the higher end units, they need to be calibrated regularly to maintain the accuracy. So I think that calibration is important. The continuous monitoring sensors, I think they give us a very good idea of where the number is, and they certainly go and they show us trending in the right way. So, but that $100 PM 2.5 sensor that sits on a wall for 2 or 3 years, sending messages, like the 30 micrograms per cubic meter you get out of that isn't necessarily exactly 30 micrograms. But when it sits at 4 for all year long, and then all of a sudden it jumps to 35, I mean, that's kind of your indicator that, oh yeah, we've definitely got smoke and particulate entering the building. So there's I think this needs to be a bit of a buffer around those division between hot, low, medium, high, and sort of severe smoke risk. When you're looking at those inexpensive PM 2.5, I think they're accurate. They're reasonably accurate. I think they're a whole lot better than nothing, but they're not the same as hygienists coming to a facility and doing specialized PM 2.5 sampling, or even very high-end equipment in the building. But our experience is that they line up reasonably well and that they're useful for these kind of situations.
And then we did have one final question in the chat, Steve, if that's okay.
Yeah.
As mentioned, planning and preparing for the upcoming wildfire seasons should be prepared annually. When would you recommend that?
So it depends on where you're at in the planning cycle. Like, I think if by all the trends that are sitting around now, we can expect a similar situation starting in at least the spring of 2026. So if you don't currently have a smoke response plan or a smoke management plan in place, now is as good a time as any to start thinking about that. Now you might be seeing the impacts of what the various air quality health index are is having on your tenant population. So maybe that helps you tailor where you specifically take action. So you start thinking about it now, have the document ready and completed by the beginning of the year, so that you can get the supplies in place, you can have some training done, everyone knows what's going to happen, and then you roll that out through the end of the year, and then this time or slightly later in the year, you review the plan, make adjustments in the late fall, early winter to things that need to change, and then have those implemented again for the beginning of 2027 at that point in time. So that's kind of how I envision the strategy going. It sounds really easy. I'm 100% certain it's a whole lot more complex when you're actually managing buildings, and it's not just me talking about managing the buildings. So I recognize the challenges, but these kind of documents really need to be living documents, need to be looked at regularly and understood well if they're actually going to serve a purpose. There's no point in writing a document if it sits on a shelf and no one ever implements the plan, or no one knows what the plan is when the event happens.
Perfect. So that's all the questions we have in our chat and our Q&A function.
Great. Well, just once again, everyone, thank you very much for your time. And I know we've run over by a few minutes, but I really appreciate it. I think I saw there was 150 some odd people that attended, which is a remarkable number for one of these events. And I appreciate your time. And I think you've got my contact info. So if you need to reach out directly, feel free to do so, or feel free to reach out directly if you want to talk more. Thanks, everyone. And we'll end the session.